Clara stood just inside the grand oak doors of the mansion, her hands lightly gripping the small leather purse hanging from her shoulder. The room buzzed with quiet conversations and polite laughter, but all eyes seemed to flick toward her with a mixture of curiosity and thinly veiled disdain. She smoothed the crease of her simple navy dress, a stark contrast against the tailored suits and designer gowns of the gathered crowd, and took a careful breath. The polished marble floors echoed beneath her modest shoes as she moved quietly toward the center of the room, where a small group had already begun to assemble near a heavy mahogany table. Leonard Stanton, the family's lawyer, was standing there, clipboard in hand, his sharp eyes immediately locking onto Clara as if her presence disrupted the entire event's delicate balance. He was a man whose confidence bordered on arrogance, with silver hair neatly combed back and a voice that carried an unmistakable air of authority. He scanned the room and then back to Clara, his thin lips tightening just enough to signal disapproval. "You must be mistaken," he said, stepping forward with a condescending smile. "This is a private reading reserved only for those with a legitimate claim to Mr. Carlyle's estate. And I do not believe you qualify." Clara blinked, feeling the heat rise to her cheeks as murmurs spread through the crowd. She had anticipated skepticism, but the sharpness in Leonard's tone stung more than she expected. Her fingers tightened on the purse strap as she tried to steady herself. This was the moment she'd been dreading, to prove she belonged here, in the face of the growing doubt and judgment. But before she could say a word, Leonard raised his hand, signaling that the proceedings would continue with or without her. Leonard's eyes lingered on Clara with a cold appraisal, as if he searched her face for any sign of legitimacy, then found none. "I must insist you leave," he said, his voice rising just enough to carry through the hushed room. "There is no place for someone of your background here. This is a gathering of Mr. Carlyle's family and close associates." A ripple of laughter echoed among the guests, sharp and unmistakably cruel. Clara's cheeks burned, though she forced herself to stay rooted where she stood, clutching her purse tightly. She was painfully aware of every eye upon her, like invisible needles pressing against her skin. She felt the weight of the judgment, the disbelief, the sneers. I am here because I knew Mr. Carlyle," Clara said carefully, her voice quieter than she intended but steady. "He and I." Leonard cut her off swiftly, his smile widening into something more severe. "Knew him? Madam, if you did know him, you'd not be standing here looking like a charity case." He gestured toward her modest dress and plain appearance as if to underscore his insult. "You are a simple woman who had nothing to do with his life or estate. I will ask you once again, leave before I have security escort you out." The murmurs grew louder, and some of the guests shifted closer, their eyes gleaming with amusement at the unfolding spectacle. Clara felt a sudden wave of vulnerability. Some years ago, she had been confident in her truth, in her place in Mr. Carlyle's world, even if it was hidden. Now, in this grand room full of sharp suits and polished shoes, that confidence faltered. "I swear, I am telling the truth," she whispered, looking toward the older woman standing nearby who had seemed to regard her with something like sympathy. The woman shook her head slightly, avoiding making a scene, but the message was clear: Clara was on her own. Leonard's jaw tightened visibly, and with deliberate slowness, he stepped forward again. "Enough," he said, raising his hands. "I will not have this gathering disrupted by people attempting to manipulate their way into fortunes." A tall man in a charcoal gray suit, a security officer named Patrick, moved toward Clara, clearing his throat and extending a hand. "Ma'am, we'll need you to leave, please." Clara's chest tightened with humiliation but also disbelief. She had come not for the money, exactly, but for recognition, acknowledgement of something she never sought yet deserved. She looked at the faces around her, some curious, some hostile, others indifferent. None offered her an ally. "Please, just hear me out," Clara pleaded, her voice trembling despite her efforts. "Mr. Carlyle wanted this. He said to tell you." Her words galloped through her mind but tangled as they came out. She swallowed hard, the knot in her throat tightening. He named me in his will. The room fell unnervingly silent. For a moment, even Leonard hesitated, every face turning toward her, eyes narrowing with suspicion or amusement. Leonard's hand dropped slowly, his calm facade slipping for the briefest second. "Ms." he began, glancing at the name tag pinned discreetly on her dress. "Clara, is it? If you would kindly refrain from disrupting this proceeding, I assure you that the will be read in due course. If your claim holds, you will hear it then." But Leonard's tone was sharp, challenging, like a lion daring a mouse to confront him. Clara's heart pounded, standing there amidst the gleaming crystal chandeliers and polished silver trays. She felt exposed in more ways than one. Patrick, sensing the tension, remained poised but unyielding. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but you need to leave." "No," Clara said firmly, surprising even herself. Her voice gained strength despite the anxiety clawing at her insides. "I have a right to be here. Mr. Carlyle named me for a reason." Murmurs escalated into quiet conversations peppered with laughter, some sharp, some pitying. She could almost hear the unspoken words: simple woman, imposter, charity case. Leonard raised a hand again, preparing to interrupt, but Clara took a hesitant step forward. "I helped him," she confessed softly, "in his final years. I took care of him. He trusted me." A gentleman in a well-tailored navy blazer scoffed audibly from the back of the room. "Caretakers don't get fortunes. Family does." Clara glanced at him briefly, an odd flicker of sadness crossing her eyes, but she turned back to the lawyer. "Please," she said quietly, "I just want to be heard." Leonard narrowed his eyes. "Very well," he said after a pause that felt eternal. "We will proceed with the reading." As Leonard pulled the yellow documents from a leather-bound folder on the table, Clara felt the room's atmosphere shift. It was heavier now, charged with expectation and skepticism. The guests rearranged themselves, whispering among themselves in low tones, some daring to cast glances filled with disbelief. Clara stood braced in the middle of the room, barely noticing the chill creeping into the drafty hall. Her eyes flicked across the gathered crowd, seeing the narrow smiles, the raised eyebrows. The weight of the injustice pressed down on her chest. She thought about leaving, escaping this gathering that treated her like an intruder. Her fingers itched to brush a stray lock of hair behind her ear, but she stopped herself, refusing to show weakness. Somewhere in the back of the room, a young woman whispered to a friend about Clara's quiet dignity. Another man muttered under his breath about how the lawyer was making a fool of himself. It was a feast of ridicule, with Clara at the center, the unwilling main course. Leonard's voice once again cut through the murmurs: "Mr. Carlyle's last will and testament. Be it known that I, Reginald Carlyle, being of sound mind." Clara's gaze locked on the lawyer, listening intently, but something inside her began to tighten. The seconds drew out, and she braced herself. If Leonard intended to exclude her entirely, the will's contents would reveal it. The room felt suddenly smaller, the whispers louder. Clara's heart pounded in her chest like a drumbeat, each thump filled with a mixture of fear, hope, and a stubborn flare of determination. She could feel every eye upon her, some eyes consumed with judgment, some barely concealing their amusement, and others silently cheering her on, though they dared not show it. Her world had slipped into slow motion, and it was as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. Leonard's next words hung in the air like a knife poised to cut confidence down to size. If they were to achieve their goal to make her leave, they had yet to succeed. The real struggle was only beginning. What would you do, in Clara's place? Would you shrink away or stand firm? The room waited with bated breath. Leonard cleared his throat and continued with the reading, his eyes flickering now and then toward Clara with thinly veiled irritation. "Hereby, I leave my entire estate, including all properties, investments, and personal belongings, to my trusted friend Clara Bennett, provided she accepts this responsibility with the understanding of the duties it entails. A sudden hush fell over the room. Clara's heart skipped a beat. She took a cautious breath, then with growing confidence, she repeated the line, her voice clear and steady. To my trusted friend Clara Bennett. Guests froze, conversations paused mid-sentence, and Leonard's facade cracked visibly. His mouth twitched as though struggling to maintain his composure, but the surprise was unmistakable. A few guests immediately exchanged startled looks, some unable to conceal their disbelief. The man in the navy blazer from earlier blinked rapidly, as if trying to process what he'd just heard. The older woman nearby leaned closer to a friend and whispered, "I never imagined." Leonard's voice faltered as he stumbled over the next sentence. This bequest reflects my deepest gratitude for the unwavering support Clara Bennett has provided me, especially during my illness. Clara's eyes met Leonard's. There was no longer the sneer of disdain, only an urgent, almost desperate attempt to retain control of the moment. His carefully constructed authority was diminishing before their eyes. Gathered guests shifted in their seats, murmuring until a ripple of laughter erupted, this time not mocking, but sharp and incredulous. They laughed at Leonard, at the arrogant assumption that they could dismiss Clara so easily. Some men shook their heads with a thin smile, women exchanged glances that acknowledged Clara's quiet dignity. Clara took a deep breath and stepped forward. Her voice had gained strength now, subtle but resolute. Mr. Carlyle entrusted me with his affairs because I was by his side in the years no one else saw. I managed his affairs discreetly, handling his correspondence, ensuring his comfort, and caring for his needs when family turned away. She paused, scanning the faces now tilting in her direction, some reflecting surprise, others grudging respect. In that moment, she was no longer the simple woman they had dismissed. She was the rightful heir, the keeper of secrets they never understood. Leonard swallowed hard and attempted to regain his composure. "That may be true," he said, voice quieter than before, "but the family must be considered." Clara met his gaze unwavering. The family rejected him when he needed them most. Mr. Carlyle made his wishes clear and I intend to honor them. The room grew silent again. Clara's quiet strength seemed to cast a new light on the entire gathering. The man who had ridiculed her before shifted uncomfortably in his seat, unable to mask his embarrassment. Leonard glanced down at the papers, struggling for words. Some of the guests approached Clara afterward, hesitantly at first. A middle-aged woman with silver hair reached out and touched Clara's arm gently, whispering, "I'm sorry you were treated so harshly. It seems we all misjudged you." Clara smiled softly, a tiny flicker of relief crossing her face. "Thank you. That means more than you know." The atmosphere had shifted palpably. Where once suspicion and scorn had reigned, now there was curiosity and tentative acceptance. Even Leonard's steely veneer had been chipped, his earlier certainty replaced by uncertainty. As the reading concluded with Clara officially named as the sole beneficiary, the crowd's murmurs turned toward discussions of the implications. The guests who had been so quick to judge her now struggled to conceal their surprise. Clara felt a cascade of emotions, relief, vindication, but also a quiet sadness for the harsh treatment she had endured. She steadied herself, knowing this was merely the beginning of a new chapter. The day had turned in her favor not by loud confrontation or dramatic displays, but by the undeniable truth revealed in those legal words. She glanced once more at Leonard, who packed away his documents with measured movements. The arrogance that had filled this room just moments ago had been replaced by a lingering tension. The man who sought to humiliate her had been undone by the very testament he wanted to keep hidden. And with that, Clara stood taller, carrying not just the inheritance but the quiet dignity that had been hers all along. After the stunned silence began to ebb, Clara allowed herself to relax just a fraction. The air in the room had transformed from icy judgment to a curious warmth, though it had not yet become fully welcoming. She could sense that the guests were still trying to reconcile the woman before them, modest, unassuming, with the rightful heiress to the vast Carlisle estate. A few more guests approached, their faces tentative but respectful. Among them was Mrs. Grayson, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and an aura of gentle strength. "Clara," she said, "if you don't mind me asking, would you share a bit about how you came to know Mr. Carlisle? It might help us all understand." Clara nodded, appreciative of the question. She took a breath, then began to speak, her voice calm but steady, weaving a story that seemed to surprise even herself as she recollected it. "Years ago, I worked as a volunteer at the local community center. That's actually where I first met Reginald," she said, looking out over the faces around her. "He was a private man but had a real desire to give back, to make a difference quietly. When his health declined, and he became more isolated, I was fortunate enough to be asked by him, not the family, to help with his day-to-day life." Clara paused to steady herself. "I wasn't part of his formal circle. I wore simple clothes, lived modestly, and never sought attention or recognition. I respected his wishes for discretion, taking care of letters, managing appointments, and providing companionship." Listening faces softened. Some nodded thoughtfully while others exchanged glances, perhaps reconsidering their earlier judgments. "It wasn't an easy role," Clara admitted, "because I wasn't accepted by the rest of the family, or sometimes even by some of his acquaintances. But I knew it was what he wanted, his trust meant everything." Leonard, standing on the edge of the group, appeared uneasy but said nothing. The guests' murmurs shifted more toward curiosity, and for a moment, the old barriers of status and appearance seemed to break down. "You made your choice long before today," said Mrs. Grayson. "And perhaps we were the ones blind to what mattered." The atmosphere lightened as stories of Reginald Carlisle's generosity began to circulate quietly through the crowd. Clara shared that she had spent recent years quietly dedicating her life to charity work inspired by Carlisle's values, explaining her plain attire and reserved demeanor. By the time the afternoon wore on, the gathering felt less like a courtroom and more like a tentative truce among strangers. Clara moved among the guests with newfound ease, answering questions thoughtfully and even smiling softly at a few sincere compliments. She realized that, despite the initial humiliation, this unexpected inheritance had revealed more than an estate. It had exposed the true nature of relationships, of kindness overlooked, and truths ignored. Clara's story began to resonate in subtle ways. She wasn't just the heir, she was a symbol that appearances could deceive and that quiet strength often remained unnoticed. As Leonard collected his papers and prepared to leave, the guests' glances toward him shifted. No longer did he command the room, instead, it was clear his standing had diminished. Clara caught Leonard's eye one last time. His expression was tight, a mix of frustration and reluctant respect. She nodded slightly, not in triumph, but in acknowledgement of everything that had passed between them. Tonight, as she closed the doors to the mansion behind her, Clara felt something she hadn't in a long time, a sense of hope. The world outside might still judge by surface, but inside, she had earned her place. And with that, a new chapter awaited, one where dignity and resilience would shape what lay ahead, far beyond the setbacks of a harsh afternoon. The days following the will reading unfolded as a quiet storm. Leonard Stanton's once unshakable position began crumbling almost immediately. Not long after the event, word traveled through the Carlisle family circle and legal community that the lawyer's handling of the matter had been less than professional. A firm message arrived at his office: his services were no longer required. News of his dismissal hit the social grapevine like wildfire, tempered only by murmurs of regret from some relatives who hadn't stood up for Clara when she most needed an ally. Those whispers, tinged with shame, served as a stark reminder of how quick judgment can cloud kindness. Despite the whirlwind of change, Clara remained grounded. She had inherited much more than property, she had gained respect and a newfound voice in the community. Privately, she harbored no bitterness toward Leonard or the others who doubted her. Instead, she chose to focus on using the inheritance purposefully, just as Mr. Carlisle had wished. In the weeks that followed, Clara made a deliberate decision. She allocated a portion of the estate to fund scholarships for underprivileged youth and to support local charities that reflected her and Carlisle's shared values of compassion and service. Her modest lifestyle and quiet demeanor remained the same, but the ripples of change she set in motion were undeniable. One afternoon, as she met with community leaders to discuss new initiatives, she received a letter from Leonard. The tone was measured and unexpectedly contrite. He acknowledged his harsh treatment during the will reading and offered a form of restitution, not out of obligation, but from a place of remorse. Clara read the letter carefully, feeling a mixture of surprise and relief. Rather than hold on to the past, she chose to respond with grace, accepting Leonard's apology and inviting him to consider how humility and respect might shape his future dealings. This gesture seemed to close a chapter, bringing balance to a story that had begun with conflict and misunderstanding. Among her new responsibilities, Clara found herself navigating boardrooms and social events that once felt alien. Each occasion was a challenge and an opportunity to demonstrate that her worth was not tied to opulence or title, but to integrity and resolve. The Carlisle estate gradually transformed into a hub for community engagement and outreach. Clara's presence there was a quiet reminder that wealth and influence could be wielded with kindness rather than exclusion. At a gathering celebrating the launch of a new education fund, Clara stood amidst guests who now greeted her warmly. One young woman approached her, holding a book Clara had donated to the local library. "Your story inspires me," she said softly. "Thank you for showing strength without arrogance." Clara's smile was gentle, her eyes reflecting gratitude. "Thank you. It's important to remember that everyone deserves a chance to be heard." As the evening wound down, Clara stepped outside beneath a sky brushed with stars. The mansion's lights glowed softly behind her, blending with the quiet peace of the night. In that still moment, she allowed herself to appreciate how far she had come, not through grand gestures or dramatic reveals, but through steadfastness and quiet dignity. Her journey was a reminder that strength often lies beneath the surface, waiting to be recognized by those willing to look beyond first impressions. What would you have done in Clara's place? Would you have found the courage to stand your ground, or might you have retreated from the harsh judgment? Whatever your thoughts, if Clara's story moved you, don't forget to subscribe and join us for more tales of unexpected courage and resilience. See you in our next story.